Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you. I know that life outside is so hard.
Good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. And tonight, of course, I'm speaking to our regular guest, Dr. Peter Hammond, who's had a pretty traumatic year, and we'll be talking about that in a moment. But also joining us tonight is Colyn Serfontein, also known as Skid Marks, and we're going to be talking about some of the craziness that's going on in the world today, and in particular, the woke sort of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting discussion, if I could put it that way. All right, without any further ado, let me get our guests on. Here we go.
The person you are trying to reach is currently unavailable. Please leave a message after the tone.
Okay.
When you have finished, please hang up.
I'll just try Peter again. I know he's there. I spoke to Peter just a few minutes ago. So let's just try again, and then we'll get Colyn on. Hi, Peter. Hi, Peter. Hi, Peter.
Good evening.
How are you, buddy? There you are. I see you. Oh.
Yeah, I can't quite see you yet, but...
Oh, no, you won't see me, but yeah, I can see you and I can hear you, and that's the main thing. I'm just going to get Colyn on as well. He's going to be joining us to join in the chat. And in fact, the last couple of times when you like when you, we'll talk about that in a second. Your health issue you had, Colyn actually stood in, and we had a chat. So the live stream went ahead as before. But obviously you weren't there. Now, Peter, just talking about that. Hi, Peter. Hi, Colyn. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Great. Can you just turn on your camera?
Let me see if I can.
There you go. Perfect. Now, Colyn, meet Peter. Peter, meet Colyn.
Good evening.
No, hello, Peter. Third time lucky.
Well, actually, Peter, just talking about that, you've had some health issues this year. There's been an awful lot that's happened since we last spoke. You had
has been.
you had a stroke, didn't you?
I did it at the end of February. I woke up with what seemed to be a terrible cramp, and then fell over and felt the left side of my body was all lame. And as I tried to speak, I could hear my voice was slurred. I recognized I was having a stroke, so I went to the medicine cabinet and pulled out some aspirins, took that, which the doctors later said was a good thing to do. My mother was a nurse, so I knew the need to act quickly with an aspirin with a stroke, but then I tried to get back to sleep. It was 2 in the morning, and the doctor said that was the wrong thing to do. I should have gone straight to the hospital.
Wow.
In fact, only later in the morning did my daughter drive me through to the ICU and admit me to casualty and so on. Actually, in the same hospital where I was born, just down the road in Cape Town. And even though I was raised in Rhodesia, I was actually born in Cape Town. One of the few people living in Cape Town is actually born here. We seem to have millions of others who poured in, but I'm actually an indigenous Cape Townian. And yeah, that was quite an experience, to experience how our hospitals have deteriorated. My first experience with the hospital was when I was 12 years old and I was in Bulawayo.
Yeah.
And I must say the nurses were absolutely delightful. They made our time in hospital an absolute joy. I mean, they had such a sense of humor. And back then, nurses had a calling.
Yeah.
And I must say, what we've got right now is not very impressive. So while the therapists, like the occupational therapist, neurological therapist, speech therapist, they were outstanding. The nurses were more than disappointing. You could just see the deterioration in standards, and I was in a private hospital. So I believe the state hospital was worse. But, you know, the first thing the doctor says is, you must get some rest. But there's no way you can get a rest in ICU. There's monitors and alarms going off the whole time, very noisy. And the nurses scream and shout the top of their lungs, and just normal conversation, not just that they're angry at someone. That's the way they talk across. But, I mean, there's no way you can actually sleep with the noise created by them. And I'm a very light sleep at the best of times. So I must say it was like a sleep deprivation operation rather than getting rest. So I was very keen to get out of the hospital very soon. And from the beginning, they said, you can cancel everything. You're here for the duration. You're not going to get out of here soon. And I said, I've got a missions conference I'm a speaker at next week. And they said, forget that, cancel everything. You're going nowhere. You've just had a stroke. Well, at the end of the Tuesday, the first day I was in hospital, our chairman of the board, Anthony Stunder, is a great chap. He was in the paratroopers in the army and during the war in Angola. And Anthony Stunder came through. He's a real no-nonsense person. Yeah. He bought some oil. He read James 5. He anointed me with oil. He prayed for my healing in the hospital. And, you know, I immediately felt the hand of God. And fantastic. It was a good witness to everyone. I was healed. And the next morning, the OTs, the occupational therapists, they gave me batteries of tests, and they gave me a whole lot of puzzles I had to solve. And as I resolved it, they said, well, that's a record. And then after a while said, well, there's nothing wrong with your cognitive abilities. And apparently my memory was great. Everything from long term, short term to what's going on right there. And so they declared me surprisingly recovered. The doctor was quite surprised when a few days later the occupational therapist declared me fit to leave after I'd walked around the hospital up and down stairs and up and down curbs and with testing my abilities, and said I'm free to go. And so I was in on Tuesday, out on a Friday, and on a Monday morning I was leaving early in the morning to fly to Durban to be at the ministers' conference at Kwasabuntu Mission. Yeah. And they were surprised to see me because they thought that, the stroke meant I was out of action.
Yeah.
And they've got their own doctors and occupational therapists. They took my blood pressure endlessly and tested me. And even the morning of the that I was scheduled to speak, so I arrived on a Monday, I was actually to speak on a Tuesday. And the doctor came in and wanted to check if I was all right and if I felt up to it and if they should have someone else take my place.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to miss this. I've come all this way and God's healed me and I'm ready to go. And so when I spoke, there were people who came to me afterwards who claimed they were medical and said, we would not have known you had a stroke except that you told us, because there was no slurring of speech. There was absolutely no indication of any problem. And people were very nervous around me. I mean, I had Erlo Stegen's daughters wanting to carry my backpack, and I'm not used to any lady carrying my bags.
Yeah.
I believe it's the other way around. But they were all very concerned and trying to care for me. And I don't think they were used to seeing a stroke patient recovering so quickly. But it's just the hand of God, and it's answers prayer. Absolutely wonderful. I know people who've had strokes haven't been able to walk or talk since. So I don't take this lightly.
Well, look, it's interesting you say that, because another one of our Loving Life presenters, Rasul Sneyman, had a stroke about 2 weeks ago. And Marlena was saying that the only thing he can say at this stage is yes or no. And that's it. He's absolutely out of it. Now, just talking about strokes, this is quite personal to me, because my father died of a stroke way back in it would have been in the early 1990s. And he was a member of Buffalo's, and they were having a Buffalo meeting, and he was the Grand Primo, the guy with the gavel. And he was sitting there. There were about 20 people in the room, and he was just sort of putting his gavel down and saying, okay, guys, calm down. And all of a sudden, he just collapsed in his chair. It just like that, bang. And after a few seconds, he sort of came around, and he was, he seemed to be okay. And they were all sort of worried about, are you okay, Reg? And he said, yeah, I'm fine. And 30 seconds later, he again collapsed and died. Just right there in the room. But, I think that sort of death is so clean. There's no pain involved. It's just you go. I mean, I think one of the worst ways to die is having, like your wife did, cancer, and it just goes on for months and months and months and drags on. But hey, let's get away from strokes.
Well,
and death.
There's only one thing you can say about chemo, and that's that it makes you look forward to dying. But
yeah.
As you know, I'm not afraid to die, and I trust I'm ready, but I realized I haven't finished my race, and there's a whole lot God has for me to do. I've come to terms with the years that I could die at short notice.
Yeah.
And that's normally I sort of take the place of a landmine, ambush, maybe aerial bombardments, artillery barrage. I've had those things, and I've survived. What I didn't expect is I could just keel over, be lying on the floor in my own bathroom.
Yeah.
That that isn't the way you'd expect it to happen. So it just reminds one, life is fragile, and literally we are a hairbreadth away from eternity, and we need to live every day like it could be our last, and we need to make the seconds count.
Yeah. And that's why you've always got to be right with God.
Shouldn't be past anywhere lost.
That's why you've always got to be right with God as well.
We need to be up to date, and yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now look.
Anyways, I think when I was going into the field, I was expecting that I could get, my life could be shortened very quickly out in the mission fields and in war zones. But you don't expect it back home in your bedroom, do you?
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, you've had an extraordinary life. You're an extraordinary man, and it's interesting because in about 2 weeks' time, we've got another extraordinary missionary who we're going to be talking to for the first time, and that's Dr. Michael Cassidy, who you would know, who lives in Pietermaritzburg, and
I do know.
Yeah, and and Michael actually came and lectured at our school when I was a schoolboy there back in the early 1970s. And he was there for 5 nights. He had a lecture every night. And normally what would happen when you had a priest or a missionary coming and talking, you might have 50 boys attending the first night, then it would drop off. And by the 5th night, there might be 3 or 4 boys listening to what the guy had to say. But with Michael, same thing. The first night, there were about 50 boys there. But the second night, there were about 200 boys. By the 5th night, the whole place was packed. You know, every boy in the school was coming to hear what he had to say. Extraordinary man. Now, let's get on to the discussion, because we're way off topic. We're talking about the great deception that's taking place. And I just want to bring, before we get into some of these issues like trans people and stuff like that, I just want to talk about a really topical issue. And seeing that Colyn is sitting there in what looks like the dark, I'm going to ask him, Colyn, what do you think about the situation right now when it comes to Eskom and electricity, and how is it impacting you and your family?
Well, look, I'm busy working on a skid mark around that. Listen, Scott, I hear an echo.
Yeah, I can hear echo as well.
Yeah, look, no one who's listening has mentioned an echo, so it might just be some. Yeah, it's not going out to the general people, so yeah, it's not a problem as such. So, getting back to you, Colyn.
Yes, I'm busy working on a skid mark around the load shedding, because I think that all of us are so enveloped in the, how can I say, the discomfort of the load shedding. But there's a psychological thing going on here with this. We are being forced to change our way of life. We have to adapt our lifestyles. We have to adapt how we interact and when we interact. I mean, you get up in the morning, your standard routine is you get up in the morning, you make yourself a cup of coffee, and then you start your day. Now, with this load shedding, like last night, I went to bed with the lights off, and I woke up with the lights off. And you have to adapt around that, and it's beginning. Just from the little bit of communication I have with the people around me, this load shedding is beginning to create a weird form of stress in people that are trapped together, like in a household or in a business. I mean, today, if you look at today, we had a 4-hour session in the morning, and then we were on for 4 hours, and then we were off again for 4 hours from 1 o'clock on. Now, how can you manage your business? How does a business operate in it? Everybody talks a lot about, you must make provision for your own type of power generation and all of that. But the reality is many small businesses, they barely make it month to month under normal conditions.
Yeah.
They cannot afford to provide their own electricity. And then the stress around the businesses struggling is carried home by the breadwinner. And so I think that, look, I don't want to be a doom prophet or something like that, but I have been of the opinion from the word go, when this last wave of load shedding fired off, that the ANC, they got very comfortable with the COVID. They were 6 people that were controlling the country.
Yeah, the NEC.
With nobody having a say. They can make stupid decisions like you can't buy a cooked chicken, or you shouldn't wear open-toe shoes, you can't buy underwear and crap like that. But it gave them a very strong sense of being omnipotent.
Yeah, controlling people.
And when that COVID thing, they couldn't keep it going anymore. They were in a pickle because now they had to relinquish that ultimate power.
Yeah.
And what happens? Zap! Load shedding.
Mm.
And load shedding is a form of control.
Yeah, it is.
I grew up on the mines, here on the coal fields of Witbank. I grew up there. My dad was a mine manager, and many of our families and so were working in it. Many of the mines were dedicated mines for the neighboring power station and all of that. Now, the reality is that a power station is an engineering marvel. But it is what it is. It is an engineering structure. That thing is not rocket science. It's basically a boiler making steam, driving a turbine.
Yeah.
So if all the axles are greased and the bearings are greased and the maintenance is done on it, then the thing can run for ages.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, my theory is this. The ANC realized that, look, okay, with nicely balanced trickery and load shedding at stage 1 and stage 2, they can manipulate and control the population fairly well. But to ensure that they have that control, they have installed criminal components in places
Cartels.
in Eskom to make sure that Eskom does not overperform.
Yeah. You know,
And then things started getting out of hand.
yeah.
And when they turned to them and said, hey guys, stop, they said, you can't tell us anything.
Yeah.
We are in charge.
Yeah.
So the ANC has lost control over the criminal gangs operating in Eskom. And those criminal gangs, and I mean, if you look at the amounts of money involved,
It's huge.
they are making a killing.
Yeah.
And they're not going to give up on that easily.
Yeah.
So I'm of the opinion that the bulk of our Eskom problems is manipulations and not so much really technical stories about the power stations. I mean, I saw an article of American coal-fired stations that are of exactly the same age of many of our coal stations.
Yeah.
And those American coal stations are operating at between 94 and 98%
Yeah.
of efficiency.
But that's, you know what that is, Colyn? That's all to do with maintenance, which has been completely missing in action when it comes to Eskom. Now, I just want to pick up on something that you said and put this over to Peter. You know, you mentioned about small business. When I was in South Africa, I went to the Walter Sisulu Botanical Gardens in Krugersdorp. Beautiful, beautiful spot. And there's a little coffee shop there. And I spoke to the owner, and he was saying to me that before load shedding, his electricity bill was 8,000 Rand per month. Okay? That was his electricity bill. But with load shedding, for 2.5 hours twice a day. That was back in March. It's worse now. He was spending 2,500 rand per day on diesel to run his business. Now, if you work that out, that's something like 90,000 rand a month, basically, to run the business, as opposed to 6,000 to 8,000 rand. You know, that's the damage that's been done. Peter, what are your views on this whole thing when it comes to Eskom and load shedding?
Yeah, well, it's not that Eskom's the victim of criminals in as much as the entire African National Congress is a criminal enterprise. And yes, there are mafia-like criminals and there's a lot of corruption involved, but the entire government is a criminal enterprise. Just take, for example, the Eskom debt burden is over 400 billion rand.
Yeah.
400 billion with a B. And every single month, Eskom is losing a billion rand corruption, according to its outgoing CEO.
Yeah.
Something of a whistleblower now. So the government expenditures increased to 2.24 trillion rand this year, 2.24 trillion. And their debt has grown up to 5 trillion rand. So 75% of our gross domestic product is debt. The servicing of this debt is over 340 billion. 5% of our GDP is servicing the debt. In fact, bankruptcy of everything the government's operating, from telecom onwards. Right now, our mission is trying to do a mailing. Now, we used to do a lot of mailings, and every month or two we'd be doing a big mailing, thousands of envelopes and getting things out and stamps. Now, it's a major operation. You know that most of the post offices around here are closed.
Yeah, they are.
Many of them got closed simply because they weren't paying the rent to the local shopping centre or something. But even government buildings got sold up. So how the government needs to rent place, they've got their own buildings, but somehow or other their post offices can only operate in commercial centres, and then they don't pay their bills, and after a while they go into liquidation. So we go to the post office, closed. We try to go to our post boxes, can't access them. They've been bolted up because post office hasn't paid their rent to the shopping centre, so we can't even access the PO box. Now we find a post office that's open several suburbs away, but they have no stamps. So we get the stamps, and then we get telephone confirmation. We have the stamps. We go there after telephone confirmation. Have them. Sorry, the man with the key is not here. The manager's left. The stamps are locked in his office. Jeez. This is the way it goes on. So now, even once we get the stamps, there's no guarantee that these envelopes are going to be delivered. There are huge mountains, huge mountains in like Cape Mail, just next to Grand West, where they've got huge mail sacks and piles of envelopes and letters that have not yet been delivered. Apparently, we are something like 32 million mail items behind in deliveries.
Wow.
I get Christmas cards still in March, April. Last year, I was getting Christmas cards as late as September. They weren't early. They were the last year's Christmas cards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is an amazing thing that we got them. But, of course, how many just don't even get delivered? Our bookshop, which operated almost entirely on mail order, now cannot do anything by post office. It's got to be couriers. Wow. This has massively increased the cost of everything. Cost of everything is up because you pay your taxes for the police. Yeah. But now you need private security in addition. You pay your tax and your rates to clean up the streets in your suburb. But now you've got to do extra to the city improvement districts, the RCIDs and so on, so that they will do the job that the city council is meant to be doing. Yeah. Whatever we are paying to the government, we've got to double up on something else. From security through to, of course, hospital and education. You can't use government education, you need private education. You can't depend on Eskom electricity. You've got to have your own generator, your own fuel, or solar panels, or whatever it now is these days, and they're all very expensive alternatives. So your cost on everything is just massively multiplying. You can't use the postal service, you need to use couriers, and so it carries on. Yeah. And this is deliberate. I saw this, for example, when I've gone to Zimbabwe, they're not sympathetic at all. They say, in South Africa, you have power failures. In Zimbabwe, we sometimes get electricity. And now in Zimbabwe, maybe the electricity comes on at 2 in the morning. Everyone gets up, they leave the lights on to wake themselves up, because now they can recharge this, they can download and send out some emails. They've got to use the bit of time that they get a bit of electricity. So, welcome to the future. This is the way it's going all over Africa. You can see governments that are on such chaos. Bring your own infrastructure. And so many of us in Cape Town, we've had to get our own boreholes because of the water crisis that we had. They increased our water tariffs to 800%, and they never took it down, because even though the drought ended 5 years ago, we're still paying the 800% water tariff for the drought, which ended. We're not even sure that we ever really had a drought, but it was water mismanagement, basically. Yeah. And they are continually, I think this is exactly what Colyn says, we are being stretched by the government. When I was in Eastern Europe, the people said, under communist government, you're hungry, you're scared, and you're quiet. Yeah. And average housewife in Romania under Ceausescu's communism was spending 35 hours a week queuing, not with a full basket trying to get out, with an empty basket trying to get in. And you had to do 4 queues for one item. I experienced this and so on. You queue for the ration card, you queue to pay for things, you get coupons, then you queue to get the item and to pay for it and so on. And the inefficiency of a communist system, it's all designed to waste your time. So the average housewife is spending 7 hours a day in a queue. And of course, then if you talk about petrol, even Romania, which is a petrol producing, oil exporting country, the people would be queuing up for hours. Sometimes having to leave the car, come back the next day, and still parked in the queue to get fuel. Just the most basic things. Communists are not just inherently inefficient, but they like to waste your time, because the more time you're worried about things like electricity, plumbing, and food, the less time you've got to plan counter-revolution be a problem. So they want to waste your time. That's a key part of their life. And yes, you've got to bring your own infrastructure, you've got to organize your own electricity, you've got to organize your own water, you've got to organize your own education for the children. The government schools are a failure. Everything the government does is a failure. And your costs are massively increased, but your time is wasted. And I think that's the main goal. This is about control. And they don't seem to be ashamed that they're failures and that everything they do is broken, and they inherited an excellent country that was running well. Just take Zimbabwe. Do you know that when Kariba was first built in 1961, they were producing more electricity than the whole of Zimbabwe gets today. And the population has more than doubled since 1960. So we just celebrated the 60th anniversary of Kariba Dam, hydroelectric power station, and looking at it and going back into history books, they literally produced more electricity, and that, by the way, was 2 cents a kilowatt back in 1960s. It made possible massive expansion and explosion of industrial development, and every economy needs cheap electricity, cheap energy, and Rhodesia provided that with its forward-thinking, very advanced hydroelectric plants with Kariba. And I saw an old magazine. I've got a whole bunch of things at our Rhodesia Heritage Library here. Old magazine dating from 1970, predicting sort of space age advances for Africa by 1990, how everybody will be able to receive enough electricity in the whole of Africa just from hydroelectric plants on the Congo River alone. The hydroelectric potential of just the Congo River. And of course, we've got many other rivers. But they were looking at where we should be. And of course, that's if Rhodesia had been able to continue with its very efficient agricultural and industrial economy. But because we were successful, we were targeted. And it seems that the New World Disorder, their goal is to destroy those who are efficient, who are productive, who are free, who are effective, which is why they waged war against the old South Africa and against Rhodesia and Southwest Africa.
Peter?
Yes?
Go ahead, Colyn.
You must just understand. Okay, point number 1. In the past, let's say 18 months, I have developed almost a hatred for the West and the system how they operate. The main thing is this: they don't want industrial development in Africa. They only want the raw materials as cheap as possible, or steal it for free if they can, to make their countries rich. Look at what happened in South Africa. Our textile industry is gone. Gone. Our steel plants is gone. Is here and there a little bit of it still operating, but the main big ones is gone. The biggest travesty is Saldanha. I mean, Saldanha was built to process the scission iron ore. Now Saldanha is closed. Where does that iron ore go? Somewhere in the world, maybe the east, maybe the west, somewhere, but it's not being done here in South Africa.
Yeah, it's China.
So they want, the West wants poverty. They want chaos, because amidst that chaos, that is where they can steal. Look what they are doing in Syria. Exactly the same thing. They're maintaining the chaos in Syria because the Americans are stealing 80% of the oil production of Syria every day. And now they've started carting out the grain as well. Now, the British in India, by taking the grain out of India, they killed 177 million Indians that starved to death while they were caught. I mean, that starving guys were loading their ships to go to Europe.
Yeah.
So this is a Western thing. And, you know, this is maybe going to sound weird. When Trump won in 2016, I said to my wife, this is divine intervention. Because there's no logic why he could win. But he won. And I was absolutely stunned when I saw the levels that the American deep state were willing to go to prevent him from having a second term.
Yeah.
Because if he had his second term, none of this would have happened. None of this. Because he would have destroyed those deep state elements, the newcons, all those warmongers. He would have destroyed them. Now today, and look, there's a lot of people that say I'm crazy. There's going to be a day in future where people are going to sit back and realize that they only survived because of Vladimir Putin. Because he's the only leader that were willing and tell the WEF, stop.
Yeah. Now,
You're not going to get over
guys,
this line. You're not going to cross.
I see Peter wants to add. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually know some facts that will support what Colyn said. You know that some time back last year, the European Union gave a bribe to the ANC government of several billion,
Yeah.
$7 billion or euros, as the case may be.
It was 8.2, I think.
Perfectly operating coal plants at Komati, one of our biggest coal plants. And
Yeah.
that, of course, led, and part of the goal was to convert these to green energy and solar panels and things like this. We had a perfectly operational plant that was providing electricity to millions, closed down because that was a goal of leading to green energy. And you know where most of the green energy materials come from. Red China's leading the pack in terms of solar panels, batteries, and these wind turbines that kill so many of our birds. So when you invest in green energy, investing in Red China, I'm afraid to say, and it's not very green because these batteries and so on have a terrible carbon footprint. All these things that they're producing, and these darn wind turbines are a real hazard to bird life, and they don't exactly produce that much electricity to be worthy of the enormous cost. Nevertheless,
Peter,
to
I
think
saw an article.
Yes?
I saw an article over the weekend that was written by some group of guys that were looking specifically at the wind turbine system. Now, there's a lot of wind farms that has already been decommissioned because they've reached their end of life. Do you realize that not a single wind farm has shown a profit? Not one.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Apparently, that's something Trump was exposing in America too.
Yeah.
And what a waste they were. But I'm concerned from the Colgy side. But here's the kicker: that after Europe bribed our government to close down a perfectly operational and major coal plant that was providing electricity for millions, they started to order a lot of our coal. And apparently, there's long lines of not just trains but trucks lining up there at Richards Bay, shipping out vast amounts of our coal to Europe.
Yeah.
Europe's short of coal because there's sanctions on Russia. We're sending coal there while we're closing down our coal plants here. So South Africa mustn't use coal because it's dirty for the environment. But please sell it to us. Well, I don't know if they use the word please, but you can see what I'm saying. The hypocrisy of the EU
it's crazy.
and the US.
Yeah.
Well, here's another thing that came across my desk this morning. A statement by the head of MI6 in Britain. You think of M, who gave James Bond his instructions, that head of MI6, saying we have to be supporting the war in Ukraine. And do you know why? Because of the freedoms and the values that epitomize us in the West. None more so than the LGBTQ principles. So literally saying we have to support Ukraine because Ukraine is pro-LGBTQ and Russia is not. And this tallies with something else came across my table also this morning from the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill. And he said, the West organizes genocides for any country that will not organize a gay pride parade.
Yeah.
Now, it sounds a bit bizarre, but just think Iraq, Syria, Libya, and of course, you could say Rhodesia and South Africa too, going back far enough. But now Russia as well. I think the real reason they hate Putin and Russia is not because they used to be communist or used to be KGB. It's because they are now nationalist and Christian and no longer globalist. And amazing, it would seem, perhaps one of the major things driving this war in Ukraine, at least according to the head of MI6, is the LGBTQ agenda. So they want to push their transgenderism, their gender dysphoria. They're using kids as Play-Dohs, grooming kids for perverts. Their privileges for perverts is driving whole wars. And I know this from my friends in Nigeria, because in Nigeria, they had the children, the whole girls' school that was kidnapped by Boko Haram. And there was such hostility about this to the government of Nigeria that they were incapable. And because of the failure of the Nigerian government to defeat Boko Haram and to bring the girls back, the people voted to oust Goodluck Jonathan, who was ostensibly Christian, but had failed to bring back the girls. And so an ex-Muslim dictator who had seized control through a coup years ago became the next president of Nigeria. Now, an American general testified shortly after that they had real-time intel on the location of those kidnapped girls and of the full leadership of Boko Haram. They could have decapitated the entire leadership of the Boko Haram terrorist network. And they were prevented from giving this information to the Nigerian military and Nigerian government because the White House had instructed them not to give any cooperation whatsoever because they had not yet acceded to the gay agenda. They had not accepted the gay rights agenda. No, and this was testified before Senate.
Yeah, Peter, there are a couple of things that you've raised, and we'll now get on to this transgender situation. But just before we do, the first thing is that Uganda has actually brought out laws which if you're gay, you can be put behind bars. You can actually be arrested and put behind bars. And the West has actually now put sanctions on Uganda because they've brought that law out. I mean, it's a democratic country. They should be able to do what they want to do.
And Uganda, by the way, leads the world in reversing AIDS. They're one country that reversed AIDS with the policy of abstinence before marriage, faithfulness within marriage, and their strong campaign against immorality, which included, of course, perversion, had such an effect that they are the best example of a country who have reversed the trend where they've got a decreasing AIDS population, which you'd think you'd be wanting to learn from them and to encourage it.
Absolutely.
But instead, they're being demonized and they're being sanctioned because they refuse to endorse perversion.
Yeah.
Now, a member of parliament in Ghana made a good stand recently against what the European Union is doing and so on. He said, why is it that you in the West are always accusing us in Africa of human rights abuses when it comes to the gay agenda? He said, you don't do that with Pakistan or Saudi Arabia where they kill gays, where they hang them or throw them off buildings. You don't do anything about where they beheaded in Saudi Arabia. No, you don't pick on your friends in the Middle East, but you pick on us in Africa about it.
Yeah.
He said, why is it?
Yeah.
You know, why do you look down on us? You don't respect us like you respect the Muslims who kill the gays.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we don't do that. But we just want to protect our children. And I thought that's a very insightful comment from this Ghanaian.
Okay, I want to move on
to...
Hang on, Colyn. I want to move on to this whole transgender thing because, I mean, that's something that we're supposed to be talking about. We kind of got off the subject, but it's been interesting. Now, I just want to close with one thing about South Africa that's happening right now. And that is that 1.7 million SASSA-dependent people are having the expiry of their cards, which means they have to renew their cards this month. And to renew their cards, they have to go to a post office. Now, Peter's just mentioned that the post offices in South Africa...
finding one that's open.
Exactly. Now, I know a fellow, I'm not going to say who it is, because I think he's actually watching tonight. He's on SASSA, and he says the post office is so completely run down that they can only do 60 SASSA applications per day. The queues around that post office are legend. Now, think about this. You've got 1.7 million people in South Africa who are, well, a large percentage of them are not going to be able to renew their cards. They won't be getting their SASSA payments. Think about the impact that's going to have. Now, this is something that's unfolding right now, and of course, next month the same thing is going to happen because the infrastructure is not there to renew the SASSA cards. So all these people are going to not be able to get their money. Now, okay, let's get on to this whole thing about this trans situation. And Peter, if I can just start with you on this. Our world seems to be going quite insane. From a trans terrorist shooting up a Christian school in Tennessee to trans activists attacking feminists in New Zealand, who are just trying to meet under the banner. What the heck is going on in the world today, Peter?
It is insane. And I mean, we're seeing trans terrorism from people claiming to be victims and claiming to be tolerant. In fact, what happened at this Covenant school in Tennessee, which is a Christian college, is this trans activist, this woman who claimed to be a man, came in and shot up the school. And of course, if there'd just been a few school teachers, that would have stopped it very quickly. As you can see from, I've watched the footage, the closed circuit TV footage from the school, as well as the body camera footage from the police who went in. And there's no doubt nobody needed to die except the attacker if some of the school teachers had been armed. But this is the insanity in America, making schools gun-free zones. And as you know, criminals prefer gun-free zones. You don't see many mass shootings at shooting ranges and gun stops and so on. But
Just a moment here. Scott.
Yeah, go ahead, Colyn.
I think the problem is with the sound is on your side, because when Peter is talking, your mic is feeding his sound. So maybe if you can mute your mic while he's talking, that will disappear.
All right, I'll try that. But I can tell you everything is perfect on the actual recording that's going through. But yeah,
Well, that's good.
yeah.
That's the most important thing. So
Back to you, Peter.
this trans terrorist shoots up a school, kills 6 children and 6 adults. And do you know that a trans minister or priest, if you want to consider such thing, some minister in the United States who claimed to be a trans, who claimed to be a minister, compared the shooter with Jesus Christ in an Easter sermon, that she was misunderstood just like Jesus was and has been judged by others, and that basically you've got to feel sorry for the terrorist. Have you ever heard in history before that you've got to be sympathetic to the murderer and the mass murdering terrorist who just shot up a bunch of kids in a school? And apparently nobody in the Biden administration condemned the shooter. Now just imagine if this was somebody who was, let's say, a Christian who shot up a bunch of kids in a homosexual school or Muslim school or any other gender.
Oh, it would have been world news.
Could you imagine? And they would have been condemning everything beyond comprehension.
Yeah.
But somehow, because the victims are Christian, Biden just made a joke about it. There was nothing from the White House at all that day or the next day of concern for the victims or the relatives, nothing condemning the person who did the shooting. What's even more bizarre is the media fell over themselves to apologize for misgendering the mass murderer, because they called it a woman. A woman shot up, and even used her female name, and they apologized for not using the gender that this shooter identified herself as, which would have been a man.
Yeah.
So if you said that a woman shot up the school there, or trans woman, then you're guilty of offending this person's preferred gender pronoun, which is he, him. And
it or there.
Have you ever imagined something so bizarre that you're worried about hurting the feelings of a mass murderer?
It's crazy. And look, Peter, I just want to add to that here in Australia, when they reported on this, they didn't mention that this was a transgender person. They just said that this man, they actually called it a man, had gone up there and shot all these people. So it's like another white man doing the wrong thing. The transgender side never ever came into it. Now,
well, what's also bizarre is the police had lots to say about the kind of weapons this trans woman was using, but they weren't releasing the manifesto. Now, this terrorist left a manifesto explaining the motivations, but that's still secret. They're still keeping it from people. So they wanted to keep back that. So that's pretty shocking. I'm pretty sure if this manifesto said something like, "Make America Great Again, vote Trump," you would know all about it. But
yeah.
This is an anti-Christian diatribe and it's a pro-trans diatribe, and that's why this manifesto has been kept from the people. But here we've got a case where it seems whenever Christians are victims, it doesn't matter whether they're on Wendy's being shot up back in 1984 in Rwanda. Who cares about Christians? Who cares about Christians being murdered wherever it is in the world? Or an entire denomination closed down in Ukraine by Zelensky's mafia thugs.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter, because Christians deserve what they're getting. And so remember that everything that trans does is love and tolerance, and everything Christians do is hate and intolerance, just by definition. A trans person be an oppressor, they can only be a victim. They're a victim class. And this is something one needs to remember, that in our world today, everything is so against the male and pale people, against Christians, that if you're part of the oppressor class, there's one carrot you can dangle. If you want to move out from being an oppressor, vile, hated, white, straight, heterosexual, male, or even female, you can get out of it by taking this transgender surgery. If you will identify as another gender, you suddenly move into the victim class where you will be protected, will get privileges. And so there's a big carrot and there's a big stick. And the carrot is, if you are transgender, you can be received to the White House, you can be promoted, you can become Undersecretary of Health in the United States, you can suddenly be given trophies to have won women's sports and all this. So it's just an extraordinary thing what you're seeing. And there's something else that's being neglected. Every one of these mass murdering shooters have been on mind-altering drugs.
Yeah.
And so this transgender person to go through transgender surgery, there's huge amounts of drugs that they get, in order to puberty blockers and to, in the case of the woman, to have facial hair. In the case of males,
basically screwed up mentally is what.
Yes, so they're getting big pharma drugs, which doubtless have never been tested to see how much they affect your thinking and your behavior. But they're all on prescribed drugs, and every one of the shooters, there's the drug connection that needs to be investigated.
Yeah.
But who cares about the ideology that's motivated these people, that's whipped them up into hysteria, that makes them so angry, and it makes them think that everyone's the enemy, and particularly the hatred for Christians. And so why a Christian school in Tennessee had just brought out some legislation against grooming kids for perversion, and to try and protect kids from what they call gender-affirming surgery. Now, gender-affirming surgery, by the way, means mutilating the kids, drugging them up and cutting off breasts and castrating them and so on. That's gender-affirming surgery. It reminds me of chemotherapy. I don't know what the word therapy is doing with something like poison that's based on mustard gas, but seriously, to call something says poisonous chemo, the therapy is bizarre, but to call mutilation of kids, like genital mutilation of kids, to call that gender-affirming care, that's the same kind of newspeak that George Orwell was warning us about in book 1984. So, in Africa, we've still got a problem with genital mutilation of women, and I think they call it female circumcision. And there's laws against it, and there's campaigns against it all over the world, because it's a terrible thing. It happens particularly in Muslim countries, and there's many countries in Africa that have had to work very hard to fight against female circumcision or genital mutilation of women. And we know that genital mutilation of kids is a crime. People who do that should go to jail. But in America, they're doing it, and they're calling it gender-affirming care. And anyone who tries to bring in legislation like in Tennessee to protect minors, children, pre-pubescent children from genital mutilation, I mean, literally double mastectomies for girls, castration for boys. If you're trying to do that, you are guilty of discrimination and a hate crime. And they're whipping up these trans kids to be so worked up to think of all Christians and all straight people as the enemy. And it was inevitable. Sometime one of them is going to get some weapons and get out there and kill a whole lot of innocent people. Because when you give people a sense of grievance and victimhood, well, that's what's going to happen. Just like when you have the millennials of South Africa whipping up black people to feel that all whites are evil racists who've oppressed them and are responsible for their dilemmas, not the evil government that's stealing everything from them and destroying their future through corruption. No, you've got to blame the minority whites who are trying to make this country work. The people are basically paying the bills and the taxes. They're the ones who are the problem. And somewhere along the line, somebody's going to do hate crime and murder farmers and things like that, because you've whipped them up. So the same thing with this trans community in America. The media is whipping them up to hatred of the stigmatized scapegoats, in this case, white Christians. So here's this trans kid who can shoot up a bunch of children in a Christian school and feel that she's the victim. And you've got the media feeling sorry for her, and you've got a minister, trans minister, equating this murderer with Jesus, who is misunderstood and judged. And
that's just crazy. Now,
can you imagine such blasphemy from a minister?
Now, Peter, I'm just going to just ask Colyn what are his thoughts on the whole situation with trans?
Look, as far as I'm concerned, we have to see this as part of the WEF globalist agenda. They started off just after World War II with a massive drive to get women into the workplace. And it was driven under the banner of women's rights and all of that shit. And they got the women into the workplace.
Just on that score, sorry, Colyn, just very quickly, it was actually the Rockefeller Foundation that actually came up with that strategy, just for the record. Back to you.
In the First World War, actually, yes.
Back to you, Colyn.
So they've got the women into the workplace so they can get more taxes from them. There was money in it for them. But the bonus was homeschooling disappeared. So the children landed into government schools. so they could start with their brainwashing. And now we get to a day where we are sitting here today. And I look at all of this, and I did a skid mark on politicians is a species that needs to be exterminated. Because they developed in the late 60s, these professional politicians.
Yeah.
Prior to that, you had a guy from the community that was willing to go and represent the community, but he was a successful businessman or a farmer or a doctor or a lawyer or something. And he went to Parliament, and he was out there, and while he was there, he was looking at ways to get benefits for his community. But then here in the late 60s, you started getting these guys that gets a degree from a university, and that is now make him suitable to be a politician. And that's when the professional politicians started developing. And if you look today, none of those guys that are sitting there in Parliament or sitting in the parliaments in America or in Europe, they've got no connection with the constituents where they're coming from. Nothing. They're just there to drive an agenda. Now, what we have today, they've got this, now they've created another species. These trans things, they're not even human, they're things, man. As far as I'm concerned, they're things. The fact of the matter is, if you say you are a Christian, there is no way that you can condone any of that.
Yeah.
None of that. Because as a Christian, what they are doing is a sin. But we are pushed to accept this new species. I saw an interview where they had with Putin, and the girl said to him, but you have gays here in Russia. And he said, yes, every society has got its own shit. But those people will never have a parade in one of our city streets.
Yeah.
And you know the weird part is, I don't have to do anything about it, because the communities will wipe them out if they do that. They say, we've got Nazis here in Russia as well, but they are in their holes and in their cupboards where they belong. If they come out onto the streets, the communities will slaughter them. Now, if you look at the hatred that was generated by the Western media against the Russians, all of that is based on the simple fact that in Russia, families is protected by the Constitution of Russia. A marriage is a man and a woman, not a parent number one and a parent number two. Those things does not sit well. In 2015, one of the Rothschilds published an article, and the main gist of it was that Putin is the greatest danger to the new world order that exists.
Yeah.
And that is why they are fighting him like that. But if you look what is happening in the Western societies with these gender creatures that they are forcing on us, I mean, that White House is absolutely a disgrace.
Yeah.
Everything is gender there. I mean, what is his name? Yes, like I keep forgetting his name. I see his face, but no, I'm trying to think about it. But in any case, forget his name.
Yeah.
And he said that the gender issue, there goes my power. The gender issue is for America a major component of their foreign, whatever they want to call it, their mission. And I sat and I listened to the idiot and I thought to myself, how is it possible that what we refer to as the leaders of the West can have something like that? How is that possible? But my personal opinion is the EU is going to break up. It's a matter of time. America is so close to a civil war that it's unbelievable. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody talks about it openly.
Yeah.
But I was listening to a debate on the Duran, and there was a guy talking there. He used to be one of Trump's lawyers and so forth. And he said, in February 2021, somebody ran a poll in the States. And the question was, do you think America will get to a civil war? And 16% of the respondents said yes. They ran that same poll in February this year, and 64% said yes.
Wow. You know,
Now,
I just want to say, Colyn,
the divide between the conservatives and the liberals has now become of such that it cannot be breached.
it's a chasm.
Yes,
Colyn,
it cannot be breached.
I just want to say that I think that Texas and Florida could quite realistically break away from the United States. They could become independent states because they are so pissed off with the people in those states are so pissed off with what's going on in California and New York and places like that. But getting back to this trans thing, Peter, are you aware that in Canada, if you protest against an LGBTQ gathering, and you know, they might be sort of having a little bit of a gathering somewhere on the street, and you go and protest against them with placards and stuff like that, and you come within 100 yards of them, you can be fined $25,000 and face up to 10 years behind bars. And but if that's a Christian gathering and you've got LGBTQ guys protesting against them, they can come within inches and nothing happens. What are your thoughts about that? What's going on?
Well, Justin Trudeau is a real globalist, New World Order.
World Economic Forum.
World Economic Forum protege of Klaus Schwab. What a totalitarian dictatorship Canada's become. We had such hope for Canada with the Canadian truckers, and just disgraceful how this obviously broad movement in Canada was demonized in such an evil way by the media and by the government and crushed, and their rights trampled all over. And shame on the Canadian police for how they abused the rights of those people and treated them like dirt. Even having Canadian Mountie on horseback riding over a woman who's using a walker, and just the disgraceful abuses there. I think Fidel Castro would be proud of Justin Trudeau and what they're doing there. And of course, this Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand.
Yeah.
What a wicked witch she turned out to be.
God.
So you can see with how they treated poor Kelly Jane Keane, who's a women's rights activist from Britain. She went to New Zealand to speak on the banner, Let Women Speak. And a bunch of men in dresses assaulted Kelly J. Keane, and the woman gathered there did not let them speak. In fact, if you watch the video footage, it's very disturbing. You get a headache from the noise, just sirens going off and whistles and just non-stop noise and screaming and shouting and swearing that has to be bleeped out for broadcast. These were vile people, angry people. They were hate mongers claiming to be against hate. They were intolerant homosexual, transgender activists who were accusing the women's rights people of being intolerant. It was, the inversion was bizarre. They poured ketchup over some tomato juice or whatever over this poor woman, and she had to be escorted out by this mob. They were trying to bring her to the ground, and Kelly J. Keane said she feared for her life, and she feared that if she fell to the ground, they would kick her to death and she'd never get up again.
Yeah.
And it was hard enough for her to get out there. And it's a disgrace that the New Zealand government didn't provide protection, there were no police in the centre where this happened. And, can you imagine if there was a group of homosexuals or Muslims gathering and some, let's say skinheads or whatever come and trying to attack them? Do you think the police would get involved? And in this, they didn't arrest anyone, and they let these men in dresses wearing makeup beat up a bunch of women. I mean, how disgusting is that? And they were just gathering under let women speak. Now, Jane Keane is a very level-headed woman. To hear her talk, she's very straightforward. She's condemned by the Australian government as a Nazi, which is absolute rubbish. And there's just nothing true about it. But the Aussies and the New Zealand government and media should be so ashamed of how they treated Kelly J. Keane and the feminists who were trying to support her. Because what they're saying is women need their private spaces, they need respect, they need privacy. And they said, we should not have any men, no matter what they call themselves and what surgery they've had, should have access to women's bathrooms, changing rooms, or sports. And they've got women's rights have been developed over the years and centuries, and suddenly they've been wiped out in the last few years with this transgender movement. And to me, the transgender movement is just revolution under a new name. They found a new gimmick. There always were a few little cross-dressers and a few weirdos at the outskirts of society, but to mainstream this, I think you can see what's going on here. This is big business, this is big pharma, and they found another way of making a lot of money, but more importantly, of shutting down dissent and advancing a revolutionary agenda. And because you cannot question or say anything against the transgender crowd. They are a new protected, privileged victim class, and privileged beyond comprehension. To think that they can get away with such violence, they can shoot up schools and be victims.
Yeah.
They can beat up women and be victims. And you get these New Zealand thugs in dresses saying they're so proud of having chased Kelly J. Keane out of New Zealand because there's no place for hate and intolerance in New Zealand. Now, if they could have just seen themselves, if you've seen the video footage, it's plain where all the hate and intolerance is coming from.
Yeah.
But those hate mongers are accusing the women's rights activists of hate for just trying to say something simple like that women should be respected and have their private places. No biological male should be allowed to be invading women's privacy and encroaching on areas. And it doesn't matter what they call themselves. And that Kelly J. Keane, her crime was she made a poster, which later is now as T-shirts. She put up billboards with woman, noun, and adult human female. So those were up on billboards in England, and they took them down. The municipality said it was hate speech. And she took it straight from the Oxford Dictionary. Oxford Dictionary says woman, noun, adult human female.
But can you imagine what the woke society is going to do with our dictionaries? The words they're going to take out?
Yes.
It's crazy. And apparently this is being seen around the world. In Iran, in China, in Russia, the people are looking at this and they're saying, and the West claims to be so morally superior to us. Look what they're doing. Yeah. And they don't respect women. Look at this. So I don't know who's going to be impressed. Nobody in Africa that I know is impressed with what the West is doing. Well, apparently, the West has become Sodom and Gomorrah. Apparently, James Bond books are going to be rewritten to become gender neutral. Can you believe it?
Well,
James Bond books.
I believe that the new James Bond film comes out where now the new 007 is a black woman.
Are you joking?
So, no, the latest one that came out, James Bond's retired.
Oh no! That is just wrong.
Well, I haven't seen it and I've no intention of seeing it, but apparently they're already in the films moving on to that. So, can you imagine in South Africa somebody bring out a film on Shaka Zulu being played by a white, for example?
Or Nelson Mandela being played by a white person. I mean,
by a white transgender thing.
Now look, Colyn, you've been sitting there just listening to what Peter's been saying about this subject, and he just touched on women's sports. Now, what is happening now are these transgender males who are good runners or good swimmers are now entering women's sports and taking out all the records, taking out all the medals, and the women are just saying they're full. This is not right. What are your views on how this is just going to change sports if they
Look,
don't nip it in the bud?
we have to come back to the WEF's plan. And you must understand that the WEF hates the family, the core Christian family. They hate it because they know they cannot control that. So we have that problem. And they are doing everything possible to destroy families. And this gender shit is the same story. They are destroying the core family. Now, I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you two guys, and there's a lot of people listening. I'm going to tell you this. What I'm doing on my skid marks. Someone asked me about it on Thursday night and said to me, why do you keep on doing it? You are getting so much resistance and so much. I've been blocked and banned and what?
I know you've had some community strikes.
And I
know all about this.
I said to the guy, now this is an old friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I don't talk about these types of things because I keep it to myself. But then I said to him, you must understand. I don't know if you will be able to really associate you with me after I'm saying what I'm going to say now. But I have a firm belief that I've got a calling to do what I'm doing. I have a talent to be able to speak well. I've got the ability to reach people of basically every level. I have this ability to make complicated things simple. And I will not shut up unless I die. I will keep on talking because if I don't do it, I'm not going to be listening to my inner calling. Now, I have had encounters with the Holy Spirit in 60s already, and I have had many other weird things that this is not the place to talk about. So what I am seeing, and I think it is very, very close in the West, I am seeing a revolution because there are millions of people in America that just cannot associate themselves with this godless things that is happening. They cannot. And I'm seeing the same thing happening in Europe. The problem with Europe is that Europe, the EU, managed to basically destroy nationalism. Now, when the COVID thing started, in one of my skid marks, I said that what this is going to do is going to awaken nationalism in people. And let's not mix nationalism with some of the media interpretations of nationalism. Culture. There are people that are now realizing that their cultures are being butchered. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. Putin is in the Ukraine because the Zelensky Zotskis was trying to destroy the Russian culture. And that's why he's there now. So we are going to see this. Africa has got a very low tolerance for gays. There are, here and there are spots where they do their little thing. But they won't go and do it in the streets. They do it here in South Africa because the government protects them. And in the Western Cape, the DA even paints rainbows on the bloody roads. So they're just as fraught as everybody else. So for the average black guy, this gender confusion is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Many of them don't even understand it.
Yeah.
They don't even understand it. Now you get a guy like that guy in Uganda that stands up and says, we will protect our families. They don't try this gender bullshit in the Middle East, because in the Middle East, you come with things like this, they just chop your head off. And that is the problem that we are. I think a big thing is, we as Christians need to get to the point where we look past religion and use a religion as a tool of division. Because I said to a guy on the other night, I said to him, if you just look at South Africa, we are, the whites are supposed to be the majority Christian community. But how many different churches are there? A lot. And unfortunately, there are people that has got this opinion that if you are not in the church that he is in and do the things the way he is doing it, you're going to hell. Don't matter whether you are following the same Bible. And I think that is one of the big issues, because that makes it that many Christians has got a natural resistance against the people from the Middle East because they are Muslims. Doesn't matter whether they're Muslims. They are good people like you and me. The fact that you're a Christian and he's a Muslim is not enough reason for you to hate him or to kill him. Mm. I've said it to a pastor one night. I said, you know, if you were born in Baghdad, you would have been a Muslim, because you would have been brought up in a Muslim home.
Yeah.
That is the reality. And just accept it like that, because we've got this, the Bible tells us God is the creator of everything on heaven and earth. And he's a loving God. And now you want to tell me, because of a geographical incident of Scott being born in Bali, he's going to go to hell. That's bullshit as far as I'm concerned. So the fact of the matter is, we must just look past the religion thing. Let's look at the basics of decent people, because Muslims do not abuse their children. They are that do it. As Putin said, every community has got its shit. There are people, but I spent 7 years in the Middle East. And it was, for me, the first thing when I got there, the first thing that struck me was their strong family bonds.
Yeah.
How important family is to them. I mean, Scott, they go, their work day, they stop at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's when the day stops. Then they have what they call family time. They go home and they spend time with the families. And then 5 o'clock, they have their meal together, all of them together. And 7 o'clock, they go back to the office until 10. And, you know, I thought to myself, yes, these people, they care about their families. And I've said to my wife the other night, I said to her, you know, it's crazy in our country. If I think about when I was a child and grew up, my parents, how many family events were there and how much effort they put in to get together. On weekends, on holidays, on Christmas. all the nephews and niggies are there, and we all knew one another. My own children don't even know all their nephews and niggies. They don't have any contact with one another. They don't make an effort to go and see one another. So the family is being fragmented and disintegrated.
Can I just speak to that, Colyn? Because I think you've raised a really, really pertinent and topical point. And just a week or so ago, I was speaking to Michelle Duplessis, who has a business called My Data. And she's right into the psychology of people today. And for the first time, I heard about this new generation that's coming up now, who are actually being called snowflakes. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but the new generation is being called snowflakes. And why they're being called snowflakes is because they spend their lives with their faces stuck in front of a little mobile phone. They have these little avatars, which are them. And the avatar can be a cat, or it can be a mouse, or it can be a dragon. And they basically take on the form of whatever that avatar is. And some businesses now in America where these snowflakes go to work with a catsuit on, with a tail and head. And, you can't discriminate against them. And this is why people, the snowflake generation, are so screwed up. That's why there's so many transsexuals, so many gays, so many lesbians, because they've lived in this fantasy world and they've found their little spot, and then they bring it into the real world. Now, Peter, what are your thoughts about this whole thing when it comes to, the impact that this is having on the young people today?
It's absolutely devastating. This is a war against Christian civilization. Another word for transition or major change is revolution. And do you know that before the French Revolution, transgenders came out of the closet and homosexuals held massive balls, and for the first time you got pornography coming out in the mainstream society. All of this is documented in Otto Scott's book on Robespierre at the heart of the French Revolution, and best book ever written, the French Revolution. Transgenderism, transgender balls, and literally the police would attend, and the leaders of society would come and they would accept the transgenders and the gays, these perverted balls and people cross-dressing and all that. And that preceded the collapse of French monarchy and the French Revolution of 1789.
Right.
And so something that is so disgusting in society. So, for example, there's another book that exposes sex in the Weimar Republic of Germany. In the 1920s in Germany, after the abdication of the Kaiser and the Versailles Treaty, which has got to be the worst treaty in the history of the world, and the economic destruction of Germany and putting all the burden of everything of the First World War on Germany, which is the one country that actually tried to stop the insane slip into the First World War. But nevertheless, replacing the Kaiser were a bunch of these perverts who turned Berlin into one big brothel, and Berlin had 800 sexual-orientated businesses. The very first transgender surgery in history was done in Berlin by a Jewish doctor on some transgender character and who died on the operating table. So the very first transgender surgery ended in a patient's death. It was in Berlin, and they had all these cabaret shows, and cross-dressing and transgenderism was very big in Weimar Republic, Berlin. And it explains the backlash and why so many people were sick and tired of this. And when the brothels were closed down, and there was no book burning in Germany. Germany was a country that produced the scientists that produced the first rockets and jets and so on. They weren't against knowledge and books. They were burning pornography and communist propaganda. A lot of it was this perversion stuff. So the so-called book burning was nothing less than getting rid of pornography and communist propaganda. But this is what created this big nationalist backlash, was the revulsion against what the Weimar Republic was tolerating and celebrating. You see, one of the slogans of the transgender movements is end heteronormativity. I don't know if you've ever heard that word before, but you and I are apparently heteronormative, meaning we believe heterosexuality is normal. And by definition, transgenderism is not normal. What we're seeing here is nothing less than revolutionary. This is cultural Marxism. This is the Mercurian theory or the termite strategy. The Frankfurt School of Marxism, who gathered in Frankfurt during the Weimar Republic, by the way, and they were part of this whole pervert thing. They said Lenin got lucky. We're never again going to get the correlation of forces that brought down the great Romanov dynasty in Russia and brought the Bolsheviks to power. The West too Christian. To win the West for Marxist revolution, we're going to have to go into cultural Marxism. We won't be able to do a revolution in the streets like worked in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And so Herbert Marcuse and other of these revolutionaries, such as Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, who was the founder of the Italian Communist Party, they came up with the Gramsci strategy, which, so Herbert Marcuse said, what we need to do is bring a foul language, crude speech, vulgarity, and sexual perversion into the arts and sciences. We must use swear words as the grenades against, as explosive grenades against the bourgeois community. We've got to undermine Western Christian civilization by mainstreaming foul language and crude speech, and by celebrating perversity on a stage, which in fact is a major emphasis in Mein Kampf, is how the vulgarity and the crudeness and the perversion that was going on, turning Vienna into a brothel and all of that, which was obviously incited many of the nationalists to say we've got to fight against this. This is disgusting. This is the first stage of communism, seeking to destroy our culture and our countries. And certainly in Berlin. So the cultural Marxists came out with the idea we need to Marxize the inner man. The way we need to do it is get everyone in the West to think of everything without regard to God, and especially the claims of Jesus Christ.
Right.
But you have basically, you've got to secularize everything and turn the Christian mind into a non-Christian mind and then into an anti-Christian mind. And we'll do this through the mass media. And they said there's 5 culture-carrying, culture-transforming institutions we need to infiltrate. This is Marxism 101. Education, entertainment, news media, religious institutions, political institutions. But of them all, education and entertainment, news media are the most important, because that affects the religious and political too. And so he spoke about the termite strategy, that just like termites might be eating the insides of your pillars, you can put more paint and whitewash on the wooden structure, but one day the termites will have eaten so much of the core that it's going to collapse. And he spoke about the need for marching through the long march through the cultural institutions of the West until they rot them from within. And so the goal is to, in art, turn from celebrating beauty and all of that to celebrating ugliness, and do everything you can to undermine society. So the opposite of what we read about in Philippians, whatever things are true and noble and virtuous and excellent, think on these things. Their idea was whatever is vile and perverse and meaningless and chaotic, that's what you celebrate. And so using the arts and entertainment and music, of course, I mean, just think rap and hip hop and other things that are just noise masquerading as music. Everything that makes the West beautiful, just destroy it from the inside. And this includes architecture. It goes all the way through to the culture and the books the kids get. So Marxizing in man, this is all called cultural Marxism. And this perversion business of having a bunch of transvestites prancing around in high heels, wearing makeup, and having drag queen hour and grooming the kids in a school to be sexual perverts or to be victims of sexual perverts. This is an advanced stage of their revolutionary agenda. End heteronormativity. So basically, you summarize like this: they will not be satisfied with the deviant being declared normal. They want the normal declared deviant.
Wow.
End heteronormativity.
Now, look,
you and I are too male, too pale, and we straight.
Yeah.
And those are 3 strikes against us right there.
Wow. Now look, there's one thing there's absolutely no question in my mind that's taking place right now, and apparently there's a slight problem with my sound, so I hope this is a bit clearer. And the thing that's happening, as far as I'm concerned, is that there is a very vile spiritual war going out there, and Satan is basically ruling the roost right now, and this is why we're having what we're having. Guys, I'm going to wrap up this live stream shortly, but I want to put one final question to both of you. Okay, we've talked about how society's become perverted. We've talked about transgender people. We talked about how the moral compass has just gone out the window. What are the implications for our families, our freedoms, and our future with what's happening today? Colyn, over to you, then I'll put the same question to Peter.
Well, Scott, I'm going to just have it short and sweet. The only thing, and I'm going to refer to decent people, and I'm sure both of you understand what I mean by decent people. Now, the only way is for decent people to revolt. If they are not going to do it, we are going to be wiped out. So it is actually a fight for survival, and the survival of our families, the survival of our culture, and the survival of our Christianity. If that is why I am confident that America as such is going to break up, because the tension between the left and the right is now reached a point where it will explode. The chasm is too wide, and those ropes that are still holding them together are under massive stress. And I spoke to an American guy, and he said to me, the problem is that you don't have red states and blue states in America. He said, you've got red land and blue cities. He says, and that is a big issue. And but there are more and more people that realize that everything that is good to them and dear to them is under threat. I cannot understand what happened in Canada. I've always imagined that the average Canadian is very much like the average Afrikaner. And but then when I saw the way that Trudeau managed to basically demolish the truckers, I thought to myself, what the hell is that? How is it possible that those people take this? And you know, there was, I may be very wrong, but one of those Eastern European countries, when the people revolted, by the second day, the police joined in with the people, and they got rid of those communist leaders. And I cannot understand, how is it possible, when I looked at what was happening in Australia during the COVID and in New Zealand, how the police were bullying the people. I couldn't understand, is there not a police officer or a police general or a leader in the police that understands that the police are there to protect the civilians? The police are not there to protect the politicians. And I couldn't understand what's happening. If I look at South Africa, we've got a different setup here because of the fact that we are a small minority white people. I mean, we are, yes, we are about 4 million against 60 million. And so, yeah, 2 million of us were very upset about what was happening, but we couldn't do much because it is like a few months ago there was all the stories in the news about that riots at the university in China that is going to topple the government. And I listened to a debate on the Duran, and there was a guy that is living in China. He's a Canadian, but he's been living in China for 14 years now. And he said in the city that he lives, 46 million people stays there. 46 million people in that one city. And he said the protest was at one of the universities, and the total number of students involved in the protest were 8,000. And he said, now just tell me, how will 8,000 topple 46 million?
Yeah.
And I've said it many times to people, we are being fed misinformation about China at the same rate that we've been fed misinformation about Russia. And if you go and you look at what is really happening in China, they made a big story about the Uyghurs that are being slaughtered and butchered. And I saw an article on Telegram, and I watched the videos, and they had an interview with a guy that went there to go and visit that communities, Uyghur communities. And he said, when he arrived in China, he said to his guide, that is where he want to go. And the guy said, yeah, sure, let's go. We must catch that train and that train and that. And he thought, why don't I get permits and things like that and so forth? And they went there, and he came there, and he said, all the signs on the streets are in 3 languages, the Chinese language and the Uyghur language and English, I think. And he said, he was in a normal society. And then he asked his guide, and the guide said to him, yeah, there are in this society, there are extremists that are trying to change the whole society. And they are using the Western media to push their agenda. And that is exactly what we saw with Russia. Now they're making a big story again about this latest guy that is now being jailed for 25 years. But I read on one of the Telegram channels, there was a journalist that wrote a piece about it, and then he explained exactly what that guy was doing. That guy was getting $30,000 a month from the CIA.
Wow. Wow.
Now, I mean, that tells you a lot of things.
Yeah.
And if we come back to us here in South Africa, our society is on a knife edge. But I've said it previously, I've mentioned it, and I did a skit mark on it. My personal belief is that Cyril is busy machining the environment to collapse the Republic in the same way that the USSR collapsed. But in order for that collapse to be to their liking, he must first of all get the oligarchs solidly in position. Now we've got at this point 3 identified oligarchs, and it's Rupert and Oppenheimer and Motsepe. Now, what we must watch out for is the moment that we see any portion or section of Eskom privatized. That is going to be the moment that the plan is coming together.
Yeah.
Because if the Republic falls and the oligarchs sits with all the major assets, the mines, which they already basically have, the mines, Eskom, water, railway, then they don't really care whether there's 10 or 12 or 16 republics here. Because if you want power, you've got to buy it from them.
Yeah.
If you want water, you've got to buy it from them. That is what it's all about. But I think they overplayed their hand at a point and pushed it a bit too fast. And now they've got a problem. This coming election of 2024 is up in the air. But their plans are not solidly together. Why is the Western Cape struggling like they are struggling to get independent? Simply because the DA, the ANC, and the WEF won't allow that. Because at this moment, it suits them well to have all the power concentrated in the hands of Cyril Ramaphosa, and he can make things happen countrywide for them.
Yeah. Now,
and that is why the Western Cape should have gone the Crimea way. But I've got a feeling the Western Cape players that want to be independent are not 100% sure what the outcome of a referendum would be.
Now, Colyn, I just want to, because this is a subject very close to Peter's heart, where you talk about Cape independence.
I can see it on his face.
Yeah, and Peter, just if you'd like to just address the Cape independence aspect of what Colyn was saying, and then if we can just wrap up with what are the implications of what's going on for our families, etc. Over to you.
Yeah, Cape independence is quite advanced. In fact, I have the book here ready on a case for secession, Let My People Go. And in fact, we got the message right here on the front cover, which is also summarized on the inside. These are countries that have gone independent already. Examples of secession that have worked, starting with Switzerland back in the 1200s, going all the way through the Netherlands that seceded from Spain, United States, Belgium, Texas, and all the way through Norway, Finland, Ireland, up to us, Namibia. Remember, they seceded from us and they're doing better than South Africa's, through to South Sudan, which I was heavily involved in. The point is, just the cover of the book already gives the story of secession is doable. This isn't just a case for Cape secession, it's a case for decentralization generally. Centralization is a failure. Decentralization makes more sense economically and so on. We've got the example of Singapore, which is another example of success. There's no reason why Cape independence can't work. It should work. Namibia is much smaller economically than the Western Cape, and they've done pretty well for themselves. And we believe that Cape independence is coming. There's tremendous support on the ground. We see it. It's an idea whose time has come, and Cape independence is not just a good idea. It's essential for survival. We either go down with the ANC-led SA Titanic, or we launch out in the Cape of Good Hope, and that's the way it goes. Now, I've put together this book, and we're just looking for sponsors to get printed. We want to print at least 10,000 copies, have it distributed widely. It's got the biblical, practical, historical, factual steps, what we've got to do, how to do it, who the players, where we can get more information, what the next steps are. And I believe we're ready for this, and we need to launch the Cape of Good Hope as an independent country, and it'll be an example to other parts of the country. The ANC is failing. They're a failed state. They can't keep the lights on. They can't keep the water flowing. They can't keep order. We don't want a repeat of the July 2021 violence and looting spree that happened in KZN and in Gauteng. And so the people in the Cape see this, and we are ready for independence. I recently hosted a large group of people, including members of parliament, leaders of political parties, a lot of movers and shakers, at our mission house around tables discussing practically how to work. And we're working on basically a 5-year plan with the goal of being fully independent within 5 years. And of course, next year's election is absolutely key. But there's things happening right now. There's a decentralization alliance or commission right now, which includes all the parties that are interested in decentralization and autonomy. Now, the DA's got a problem. We know the DA has national ambitions, and I've got no doubt that after next elections, the DA will be in alliance with ANC. They want to be in alliance with ANC. They've already even said publicly they're willing to get involved in alliance with ANC to be part of government. So they've got national aspirations. But the problem the DA has got is that the bulk of their supporters in the Cape have been shown to support Cape independence. So they can't ostracize their main support base by being against the idea of independence, which is near to so many Western Cape DA supporters' hearts. They may have national aspirations, but the average person in the Western Cape's had it with national and wants to break away. So they are playing a game, and they're going for a referendum. They're going for decentralization. At the moment, the DA is trying to argue for provincial control of the police, provincial control over water, electricity, and railways, and things like that, which of course are all good steps, but doesn't go far enough. But these would still be steps that would lead us towards independence. They're just moving towards autonomy and decentralization. But there are other parties in the Western Cape very much for Cape independence. And you just take, for example, the Freedom Front Plus. They grew 650% in the last municipal elections in the Western Cape in support. They've got a huge amount of growth in the Western Cape since they came out openly for independence. And there were other parties that came out of nowhere, like the Cape Coloured Congress, which was completely for Cape independence. The Cape Independence Party's been the flag waver, the pioneers in this for a long time. We've got groups like Cape Exit. Cape Exit isn't political, but Cape Exit's got over 840,000 people signed up who support independence for the Cape. We only need 1.6 million registered voters in the Western Cape to win a referendum, and that's assuming everyone votes. There's about 3.2 million voters in the Western Cape, so 1.6 million roughly would win it. And we've got no doubt there is support here, but we haven't yet put much money in. In fact, there's no big funders of this. But
Peter,
if we could get boards and everything out, we could really go quite far and fast.
Peter,
yes.
two questions regarding that. How much money is required to actually print those 10,000 books? How much money do you need to do that?
We need 120,000 Rand. The printer's already said that he will print, only charging us a paper and ink. So we can get this done very cheaply. We can get 10,000 printers for just about 120,000 Rand, which would be great. Of course, I'd like 100,000, but, that's a lot more money. But nevertheless, we've got a good printer. We've got a great product. And I've got endorsements from everything from the leader of Cape Exit, the leader of Cape Defence Party, forwards from them, and from Freedom Front Plus people. So we've got buy-in from a bunch of different groups, and I think it's a very good hands-on book. Now I've started a Give, Send, Go, a crowdfunding project that a person can find on our Frontline Mission SA.org website. So far we haven't had anyone contribute anything towards a case for secession. Notice not just the case for Cape secession, although we've got a Cape, that's the 12 Apostles behind, Cape Display in the front. We've got Lion's Head at the back with a Swiss flag outlined. This is good for any country, but it's specifically got a lot of focus on how to apply it in the Western Cape.
No, Peter.
But, yes.
The second question is, and this is from Nat, who looks after the forum. She says,
Yes.
Do you have that book in a PDF form? Because if you do, we'll put it up on our forum for you. So that'll help. And there's
that would certainly help. And we'd like to make it available as a free PDF, but we also want printed copies that people can give to their doctor, their shopkeeper, their town councillor, just something that's in hand, something hard copy, and it's quite clear exactly where we stand, and it's not going to be affected by power failures and all the rest of it. I think hard copies will help. Obviously, putting it online will reach other people, and we need that, and we're grateful for that, and we will use that too, for sure.
Now, look, I'm going to wrap this up, Peter and Colyn. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Just before I do, just last word from you, Peter, on what are the implications of what we've been talking about tonight on our freedoms, etc.
It's so important. I mean, this is a revolution, and this is such a revolution going at the most basic level of our identities as male and female and families. This is a war against Christian civilization. And make no mistake, there's a lot of billionaires and big pharma bankrolling the transgender industrial complex.
Yeah.
And George Soros has put billions into this. These transgender rights didn't just come out of nowhere and make mainstream media around the world by accident. This has been funded. George Soros' Open Society, which has funded BLM and a whole lot of other things, they're behind this too. So you can see this has got a communist cultural Marxist agenda.
Yeah.
There's another, a very shadowy billionaire, Pritzker's, they behind it too, and they have put huge amounts, they're calling it the synthetic sex identities, SSI.
Right.
And so what we're dealing with is just like, where a plastic surgery grew out of the First World War, people's faces were mangled from artillery and bullets and so on. And so plastic surgery came about to be able to reconfigure people's faces that they could live normal lives despite having been mangled in war. And in the 50s and 60s, it turned into, for celebrities and millionaires, being able to have facelifts and Botox and whatever else. And then it's now moved into transgender surgery. And there's a lot of money in this. For every child that decides to transition, it puts $1.3 million in a big pharma's pocket. Because, there's mastectomies, there's all kinds of plastic surgery, there's all kinds of hormones, and they have to be on these puberty blockers and estrogen and what have you, testosterone. So there's a lot of money for big pharma in this.
Yeah.
And the fact that big pharma people and billionaires are bankrolling the transgender industrial complex, and there's a book out with that very title.
Yeah.
There's one of the books that's out there is called Body Politics, Transgenderism, and the other one is The Transgender Industrial Complex. And that just really shows you where we're going. There's Sex, Identity and Aesthetics is another book. So people have been joining the dots and connecting these things. There's a lot of money behind this, and this is revolution.
Yeah.
What they're aiming at is nothing less than a war against Western Christian civilization. To me, it makes all the difference in the world where you stand in terms of on the Bible and in Trinity, and if we stand for Christian civilization or not. And yes, we will find Muslims and others, our allies, and many of this, we will find many Muslims and Hindus would agree with us that a man is a man, a woman's a woman, and marriage can only be between a male and a female, and a woman shouldn't be involved, men shouldn't be involved in women's sports, and men shouldn't be in women's locker rooms, change rooms, and so on. And so we can have allies, but we must be clear on our identity and where we stand. And this synthetic identity is a fraud. And a man cannot be a woman cannot be a man, and this is an inversion of reality.
Yeah.
So what we've got here is in Isaiah 45 verse 9, what do you think of this scripture? What sorrow awaits those who argue with the Creator? Does a clay pot argue with its maker? Does the clay dispute with the one who shapes it, saying, stop what you're doing is wrong? Now that's Isaiah 45 verse 9. We know that in the Bible, the script is quite clear. Genesis 5 verse 2, God created man, male and female, he created them. And this is pretty straightforward. The answer to all these attacks is to go back to the Bible and to stand firm as Christians on the rock-solid foundation. These people are building on sand. And when the storms come and the rain falls and the wind blows and the floods rise, their so-called civilization is going to collapse. The Biden, United States, LGBTQ bunch, they're going to collapse. They can't stand.
Yeah.
And what Russia's building on a more family-oriented basis is going to stand. And so right now we're seeing a war. How interesting that the head of MI6 says that the war in Ukraine is primarily over LGBTQ rights, which is what distinguishes us from Putin, our values. And he uses LGBTQ plus as what distinguishes the people in Britain from the people in Russia. So basically, privileges for perverts. And
that's crazy.
Gender confusion.
Yeah.
And so what we've got is these delusional delinquents, in many cases, men in high heels with dresses, who are, in many ways, they're stereotyping women, they're demeaning women, they're belittling women, they're insulting women, and they're trying to erase women. And this men being able to compete in women's sports is cheating. I mean, that's the simplest word. You know there's rules for every sport and for every activity, and you breaking those rules, you're cheating. And so a man like Leah Thomas, who can take away the trophy from Riley Gaines, he cheated. And everyone could tell it's cheating. And when people can't stand up to say that's wrong, there's something wrong with him. So good for Riley Gaines as this American woman champion swimmer who had won 12 times in a row these major national events. And then she has a man, Leah Thomas, who tied with her, but he was given the trophy, even though he didn't beat her by 100th of a second. They tied, and yet he got the trophy. And so Riley Gaines has been making a stand against men stealing women's sports and infiltrating it. And then she gets attacked by these hate-filled, intolerant mobs of men dressed as women attacking her. And the police, you can see the videos of the police trying to protect her. She's being led down the hallway,
I've seen
barricaded
that.
room.
Yeah.
And she was asked in interviews like with Tucker Carlson, what were the police doing and why didn't they protect you more and arrest anyone? And she said the police were actually terrified. And she could see they were terrified. The police were afraid because they knew if they did anything that they should do with criminals like this, they would be in trouble. Their jobs may be over, their lives may be over. They could end up in prison because the trans crowd are now a bunch of protected species. They a privileged, protected class because they've put in a position that any criticism of them is hate speech, and any criticism or questioning of their agenda is defined as hate. And so this battle has been won in the mass media. This is an entertainment industry. This is Hollywood giving Oscars to trans films and trans activists for so long, and disgusting films that they celebrate at the Oscars. This is what's normalized this throughout society now, so that the police even don't know what's right or wrong, or the police are too afraid to do what they know is plainly clear, because they don't want to get into trouble. And they will get into trouble.
Peter,
Yes.
I'm going to wrap up this live stream. We've been going for 2 hours, and that's about the max we can go with. People, when it's over 2 hours, they sort of balk at watching for that long.
No, quite right.
Now, what I'd like to do is ask you if you wouldn't mind wrapping up this live stream with a prayer for the world and with what's going on. Over to you.
Certainly. We are living in a time of insanity. It's quite clear this is a war against God. This is a war against Christian civilization. This is a war against women. It's a war against the family. It's a war against reality. And they are trying to have the deviant declared normal and normal declared deviant. So we need to build our lives on a rock-solid foundation of the rock of God's word. Jesus is the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except by him. This is the fact. There are two genders. God made the man, male and female. He made them. And you can't change it. And marriage can only be between a man and woman. And women's sport should be for women only. And if trans people want to compete in sports, let them compete against other trans people. Let's have it even. You don't have featherweights, middleweights, and heavyweights fighting one another in boxing. You've got to separate out. Anything else is cheating. And a biological male competing in women's sports is cheating. So we just need to keep our sanity and refuse to be bulldozed, intimidated, and railroaded into the New World Order's revolution. This is all part of the revolution. And I've heard a new word being used by women these days of gendercide. And I think that is what it is. This is part of the genocide of Western Christian civilization, but it's also gendercide. They're trying to erase women. When a whole bunch of men dressed up as women are getting women's sports and getting women's achievements and even modeling women's clothing and so on, that's just such an insult to women. It's such a disgrace. Yeah. And the job of men should be to protect women. We should be protectors. So we must make a stand. And the only way we can make a solid stand is back to the Bible, back to Christianity, back to our roots and our civilization. Right. We don't need to apologize for it. We need to defend it against this attack. This is an attack on reality. It's an attack on truth. It's an attack on the family. And ultimately, it's a war against God. So we need to stand up. And I believe it's sort of like Daniel and Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were being compelled to bow down to this new idol. We will not bow, we will not bend, we will not burn. Our God whom we serve is able to save us, and he will. But even if he doesn't, we still won't bow before your idols, nor will we serve your gods. So I believe we need to have this spirit of courage and of resistance and just say no and refuse to use the assigned gender pronouns, refuse to be intimidated into saying things that you know are a lie and are not right. And so let's know the truth. The truth will set us free. We've got to resist the revolution, and this is revolution. Aggressive assailants claiming to be victims and hate mongers accusing us of hate must be called out for what they are. I mean, this is an inversion of reality.
Yeah.
And we must resist the gendercide. I think that's another good term we could be using here.
Right.
So the billionaires and big pharma bankrolling this are the same billionaires who bankrolled the BLM cult and the COVID cult, and the lockdown lunacy, the masquerade madness, the whole lot. So we've just got to say no and be straight. No more George Soros open society revolution.
Yeah.
We are standing for Western Christian civilization, traditional families.
Yeah.
So, yes, shall we close in prayer, because we really need God's grace, intervention, and mercy.
Yeah.
Let's pray. Lord God, we bow before you and we acknowledge that you alone are God. You're the creator, you're the eternal judge, you're the King of kings and the Lord of lords. You will return not as a lamb, but as a lion. You will not come back as a savior, but as the eternal judge, the conqueror, and no one can resist you. And we pray, Lord God, that you may be merciful and gracious, that on that day you will find us faithful to your word, faithful to your work. Make us more brave and bold, we pray, to resist all the deceptions and intimidation of this world and the insanity that we see, rebelling against reality. And we ask, Lord God, that you may help us to inspire and encourage your people to stand up and to stand firm and to stand together and to work together as team players to win our communities back to you and to reclaim the lost ground from those revolutionaries and perverts who would undermine our children, who would invade the private spaces of women, who would subvert society. Give us, we pray, resolution and clarity, that we may know what to do and that we may do it without compromise and without fear. For we pray this in the matchless name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And look, it's been an experiment having both of you on, and look, people loved it. I can tell you the comments in the side chat, they're saying great live stream. In fact, Nat Quinn says have a good day, excellent live stream. So people have enjoyed this sort of format, which is great. Colyn, I know this is quite new to you. You've got your skin marks, but joining in like a discussion like this, and I just want to thank you for being part of it. And Peter, it's always an absolute pleasure having you on. You are one of our channel heroes. You have been for many years now, and it's great to have you back. I saw you wanted to make a comment. Peter, over to you.
No, I was just wanting to point out that we've brought out the latest Frontline news that's available on the website, and we've got very encouraging, inspiring pictures of how the Kwasibantu Ministers Conference and what we were involved in. Can you imagine choirs and groups like this? This is just some of what we meant to see. And I've got a real photo-rich amount on this site of revival in KwaZulu-Natal, and just a magnificent encouragement to know that there are still many who haven't bowed the knee to Baal, and there are many who are standing firm.
Yeah.
And there's hope for the future. And I think it's so important people know that if anyone wants to get hold of me, and get hold of our Cape Independence materials or anything like that, my email is peter@frontline.org.za.
Right. Okay. Now, Peter. Look. As I say, lovely to see that you're back, if I can put it that way, after your stroke.
Yep.
And look, do take care, mate. You're like a treasure in South Africa. The work you do is fantastic. And
got lots more to do, many more battles to fight, and the enemy won't get rid of me that easily.
Good. Now, Colyn, just anything you'd like to just say in closing, because you've been sitting there, and anything before we just wrap up this live stream quickly?
Well, I've listened to what Peter has been saying about the Western Cape independence. And I'm just going to throw this onto the table and think about it. The forces that is against Western Cape independence is massive. And the problem is they are in control of the country. Between the DA and the ANC, they will never allow Western Cape independence. The Western Cape citizens that want to be independent will have to take their independence. It's not going to be given to them. Never.
We know that.
They will have to take it because, as he said so well, Soros is financing a lot of these things. We must not forget for one moment the amount of money the WEF has got invested in the DA. And independent Western Cape is not a part of the WEF plan. I am a guy that is willing to listen to everything, and I can appreciate if you talk spiritually about your mission and leaving it in the hand of God. The problem that I have, Satan is driving these machineries that are preventing you from reaching your goals. And
We know that.
we've seen it. We've seen it now. You have explained it in detail how the police were standing and allowing that misfit crowd to bully that woman. My question is, the decent men, the men that claim they are decent, where are they? Where are they? Why didn't they sort those moffies out? Why not? The reality is this, right across the Western world, there's a lot of artificial conglomerates like the EU, like the United States of America. Those things does not have a right to exist any longer. Just as South Africa as a country does not have the right to exist as a country. We are in 11 language groups. That should already tell you we cannot be less than 11 republics. The fact of the matter is, the Western Cape people that want their independence, if they are convinced that the majority of the people living in the Western Cape is with them for independence, they will have to take their independence. It is never going to be given to them. I've got two questions about the Western Cape independence. First of all, how the hell are you going to protect your border? Second of all, what are you going to do with those millions of immigrants you've got there that is not really Western Cape people? There is the problem.
I've just gone into all of that, and we've got answers, and that's why we've worked out books like this. There's been a lot of thought over years, and I was involved in the independence of South Sudan, and that was very hard. And of course, the government of Sudan was never going to allow it. And same thing with Russia, wasn't going to allow Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to go independent, and so on. And I've seen the independence of Croatia, Slovenia, Slovakia. There's no doubt that every independence in the world, from Switzerland through to the United States to Netherlands, every independence had to be seized by the people. They had to work for it. No government's going to say, it's up to you, and we're going to give you independence. No government wants a project breakaway. But
you will have to take your independence.
The economic realities also, that a failed state that can't keep the lights on and whose defense force is so collapsed that they can't find 20 million rand in the defense force budget to overhaul their overheating computer system, which controls everything. But they could spend 200 million rand on a party at, was it Saldanha, where they've got 400 generals in the SADF, which means they've got a general for every less than 200 people.
Too many chiefs and not enough Indians.
Exactly. And we have got one ship in the Navy that works, only one. They've only got, I think, less than 7 helicopters that work at the moment. They've only got 3 of our jet fighters that are working now. The defense force fallen apart. They can waste hundreds of millions on their generals and on a party, but they can't even overhaul the computers or keep their basic infrastructure going. So we're not too worried about what the central government can do when it comes to that. But we have thought about protecting our borders. And let's face it, we've got desert, we've got mountains, and we've got rocky coasts. the Western Cape's very defensible, and there are plans, and we've got good strategies. We've got some brilliant.
Okay, guys, look,
just a question on this. Have you guys that wants independence for the Western Cape? Have you guys spoken to the Russians?
No, hang on, guys. Look, we've
I
been
couldn't
going
hear,
for
I
over
couldn't
2
hear
hours,
what you said.
and I don't want us to. I think we need to have another live stream, totally separate one, where perhaps we talk about independence in the Cape, and we get Peter on, and we get Colyn on. We might get a couple of other people on, and have a debate about this whole subject, because that way we.
Yeah, I mean the people like Des Palm and Jack Miller, who've been putting so much thought into this, should be part of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, let's organise that,
there's
Peter.
Some very boots on the ground, intelligent people who've been working together on this. A lot of thought's gone into how to achieve Western Cape independence, and we've been studying success stories of the past as well as the failures to be able to work out how to do it and what possible response the other side would give. So anyway, just trust the fact that there are people over here who've looked at the different scenarios, and we understand what. Obviously, we all need support to make this happen. But remember, as we need 11 republics in South Africa, the one that's most ready to break away is the Western Cape. And the Cape of Good Hope could be an example, an inspiration to others. And in the end, we can end up with a confederation, sovereign, independent states in South Africa, hopefully the Swiss type model.
Right. Now, guys, look, I've got to wrap this up. I'm so sorry, because we'll do another live stream. I'll get Melina to sort it, so we'll actually get a discussion, a debate on Cape independence, because I think it's really good to have that sort of conflicting perspectives, because it brings out new ideas, and that's what's called following the science, if I can put it that way. Guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Good night.
It was nice meeting you.
Yeah,
bye-bye, Scott.
Take care. Cheers, eh? All right, guys, that was Peter and Colyn, and I'm just fighting with my. Oh, there we go. Now my computer's listening to me, which is good. I'm going to go out with Op ons Rots, and have a great evening. And don't forget, tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we have another live stream, and in May, I'm going to see if we can tie up a debate on the Cape independence question. Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye for now.
Ons loop hand aan hand op goue warm sand, so baie wat ek wil hê, so baie dit brand. Ek staan op my rots met golwe wat bots. Ons het geen vrees, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddeloze manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Waai sterk, dis kragte wat werk. Die gevoel in my hart, dis vrees wat wil brand. Ons is boere met trots, met my hand teen my bors. Ons ken geen vrees, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddelose manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien wat gebeur, die leuen sal ons nie steen. Kom staan nog 'n keer, ek is stil, want ek weet hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddelose manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddelose manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Ja, hy is in beheer.